Happy Friday, everybody. Let's dive into the world of clutches. I've been kind of postponing this because I have a very sneaking suspicion that this clutch is going to be a lot of headaches. But it's going to have to get done sooner or later, so we might as well tackle it. Let's start by, I will try to explain how this clutch functions. Bear with me because it is kind of complicated. It's kind of strange, but we might as well start with the beginning. So this is the flywheel, obviously. This is the clutch side of the flywheel, so your engine would be on the bottom side of it. So let's kind of go through how it goes together. So this is a machine surface. Obviously, everything needs to be cleaned up, but this is a machine surface. So on this would sit a clutch friction disc that it's shaped like a donut. It's about this wide by just a little, I don't know what it is, 1/4 inch thick or something. So that sits there. This floating disc sits on top of that, and then there's a second clutch disc, just like the first one, that sits on this side, on there. And then there is another piece which I am completely missing, so I'll have to fabricate from scratch. It is machined flat on the bottom side where it would be rubbing against that friction material. And on this side of it, there is 3 slightly ramped surfaces. This is a cast part originally. And those 3 ramped surfaces ride on these ears, let's call them, of the clutch. And the function of those is to be able to adjust your clutch. So this plate ultimately bolts to the flywheel. I did discover today that it actually only bolts in one orientation. The bolt holes only line up in one way, like that actually. And then you have these 2 bolts here, which should be tight. And then you loosen them and you can adjust that this inner ring slides within that to, where is it? There's a plus there and a negative. So if you want to tighten up your clutch, you'd slide it towards that, tighten it back up, and then what that is doing is moving these ears in relation to the high and the low spots on these ramps that you're imagining, which is putting more or less pressure on this whole assembly. Hopefully that makes sense. So this big spring here, this big coil spring, is what puts the pressure on the whole assembly, keeping all these frictions and discs together, keeping the clutch engaged until you pull back on your hand lever, your clutch lever, which so this goes on here like this. When this is all fully assembled, this is actually compressed even farther, leaving a space between this throwout bearing and this housing to allow your throwout fork to fit behind there. So that should be pushing that throwout bearing even farther in, which is compressing that spring even farther, which is taking the pressure off of these ears, which is taking the pressure off of all the friction discs and clutch, which is disengaging your clutch. And then when you let off your hand clutch lever, you're letting off of the throw-out fork, which is releasing the full spring pressure back onto these ears through these arms, which is again putting all your spring pressure back on all of your assembly, engaging your clutch. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of a strange setup, but it's what Allis used. Well, it's actually going from memory here, a Borg and Beck, I believe is how you say it, clutch assembly, made for Allis. There should be a tag here, which is missing on these 4 rivets. Throughout this video, when I edit it together, I will try to put in a few pictures of clutch parts from my friend David Dickmeyer, which is he's restoring his 612 currently too, as we speak. So he's been a wealth of knowledge and help along the way too. So again, if I haven't thanked you lately, David, thank you. And he's provided me with a few pictures of his clutch, which is also currently disassembled, which has helped me figure out how this works and what I was missing. It took me forever to figure out how does this thing work, because I didn't have that missing ramped disc. So we couldn't figure out how the heck does this clutch work. Once we realized we were missing a part, it all kind of made a lot more sense. So we're going to have to work on reproducing that missing ramped disc. I'm not going to get into that right now, but that is a project for the near future. And then, okay, so this is all the actual Allis 612 stuff. And these are parts from that Leroy power unit engine that I had, parts and pieces that came with this whole basket case of a project. So I was looking at these as well, and I think they will, at least some of this will work as replacements for these parts if necessary. But there are small differences between them, so I don't know for sure yet if they will work or not. And hopefully I'll be able to use all this stuff once it's all cleaned up and tuned up. It'll be okay. But if not, I have possible replacements. And like I say, there is small differences. Like this ring is cast and made different than this ring. I believe, as of right now, looking at them, I believe they're interchangeable. I'm sure this is newer, so they probably just kind of streamline the process of making it instead of having this, more elaborate casting. It's just a smooth part instead. It looks as though the arms are the same from what I can see, so they're possible replacements if necessary. And I think this back part is the same as well, but until I get everything apart and cleaned up, I won't know for sure. You know what? I just realized that they're not the same. Even as I'm talking to you, I'm looking at them. That center hole is bigger on this one. So this will not work with this, the way I'm looking at it. I just realized it just now. So that's even less of this that could potentially be used. And then this is another spring. There again, I think the spring is the same as this. This is just, no compression on it. It's all fully extended. And then these, what do we got? I want to call them. This pulley, this throwout part is, I believe, different too than this one. As far as the way this inner collar, I'm not using very good terminology today, but see how that one is much deeper in there than this one. So I'm assuming it's probably not going to be anything interchangeable there either, with the exception of possibly the spring. So that's what makes this difficult, because power unit parts are similar, but not the same as the Allis tractor 612 parts. The Leroy, they're not the same across the board. There's differences there. And like this one I showed in a previous video, if you look back, the driven disc for this assembly is a 6-spline. I think it was a 6-spline. It wasn't a 4-spline like the tractor needs to be. So that was not usable on the shaft, so I didn't even bother bringing it out here. That's still back home. As far as the next step, would probably going to have to be figuring out how to disassemble this safely, because obviously there's a lot of spring tension on that spring there. From studying this one, it appears as though this inner collar, and that's the throw-up bearing on the back side there. This inner collar has another ring on it that I believe is threaded onto each other. So I think this outer ring needs to thread off of the inner ring, and then the rest of the assembly can come apart. And I'm not for sure yet, but I think this one is the same principle, only it is this part of the collar, if I can get the light in there so you can actually see. I believe, if you can see it down inside of there or not, is threaded onto that inner part, I believe is how that works. So that that should be interesting to try to get that all apart without breaking anything. This is a cast brass here, and that inner is also brass. Not sure if that's a cast part or just a machine part. And there's also this, like a snap collar ring between the brass and the throwout bearing that's like only halfway in there. I don't think it's even assembled correctly, I don't believe. So I don't know if that has partly to do with how that is assembled, or if that's part of holding the throwout bearing on there, or what. I'm still figuring this all out. But it's obviously, it's all got to come apart, because it ain't no good the way it is. It needs to be fixed. Another observation I've made is this original parts has these sheet metal shims, let's call them. They're made in between the two parts. I believe, because this does not have them, I'm guessing what that's for was they needed to, things were worn and they're maybe out of adjustment. So instead of getting new friction materials or whatever, they put those spacers in there to tighten things up that little bit more, to maybe get them by a little bit longer. I'm guessing is what those are for. I could be wrong. And then this here is part of the oil capture slinging system, whatever you want to call it. Because if you remember, this shaft, there was no seal between the transmission differential cavity where there's oil flinging around and the shaft, so it is open to, you know, stick to the shaft and come out here and fling off, and there's that hole to drain back inside, if you remember. Again, go back and watch previous videos and I'll show you all that in more detail. But then this goes in there, so that little trumpet shaped piece keeps the oil from flinging outside here, keeps it inside that little trumpet piece. And then I'm assuming it's actually designed so a little bit of oil actually works its way out of there and goes in here and lubes your throwout bearing, because there's what appears to be little holes. Where are they? If you can see, you probably can't see them. It's hard to video some of this stuff. There's a little hole inside there where the oil, I'm assuming, goes through this to oil the bearing. Again, I could be wrong. We'll find out more once I get it all apart. And then also lube a little bit in here where it's, although that's not really tight on that shaft, so I guess there doesn't really need to be any lube on that. And I think, I'm not sure what lubes this pilot bearing. I'm thinking that possibly gets lubed from the back of the engine. A little bit of oil leaks out the back of the main seal or whatever. Not sure. I'll have to ask and learn some more about that. I guess that's just a standard size bearing from talking with David, so that's a good thing. I'll have to get that out of there too. And I believe there should be a thin steel plate that bolts on with the crankshaft bolts that keeps that bearing located, I believe. So I think that kind of sheds a little bit of light on how this clutch operates. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too bad and I was somewhat clear with how it all works. Just to show you the other side, so that's the engine side of it there. It bolts onto the back of your crankshaft then. And then I believe all this assembly, once it's all done and figured out and fixed, can go on, this can go on the engine, and then all this can go in the flywheel before the entire assembly. So if you remember, so this is hanging off the back of the tractor. Your whole main casting is here with your drive wheels on the end of the main casting. And then there's your engine bolts to the front side of that main casting. Mosquitoes getting bad out here. So that whole engine assembly can get put on from the front side, and you know, just slide on your main shaft, and then all you gotta do is tighten up your this will have to be out and separate. And you take it all apart, so that's wide enough to get your clutch assembly in there. There's one unit. You put this together, tighten up your bolt, and you're good to go, basically. So yeah, that's kind of what I know at this point. I did, as a side note, I threw together that under hitch there, the bottom hitch, just finger tight, because that'll go on the bottom side of there, but I can't do that yet until that's off the stand, which probably won't happen until it's back on the tractor. So I just set it there for now, get it out of the way. But yeah, I think I'll work on cleaning up some parts here and figuring out how to get things disassembled a little bit. And if I have any more to add, I will check back a little bit later. Okay, I got this power unit partial clutch apart. I was mostly right. So assuming it's the same as the tractor, like I was saying, the oil would get through there, through these two holes, which works its way into the throwout bearing. And that sits on there like that. Should be pressed on all the way, but so that's what lubes that bearing. And then this goes in here. This obviously all gets assembled onto the spring, but for display purposes, so there's this groove which goes to that, like that, to keep that from rotating on there. And then this, again, for sake of you being able to see, this collar, see if we can do it one-handed, threads on, and it was threaded on until it was flush on the end here, because there is adjustment to that, how far you want it. And then this fancy lock ring collar goes on there, goes in the hole and goes in that groove, and that's what holds it all in place. There's different holes, so if you wanted it adjusted one way or the other a little bit. So knowing that, we'll have a little bit of knowledge. Now we can start looking at the tractor one and see if that comes apart in a similar way or not. I think I'll just throw this all kind of back together for now, just so I know. Now I know how it goes, so I can use that as kind of a reference. I didn't want to experiment with the actual tractor one and wreck that. I would have rather, if I did wreck something, wreck it on this one, because it's different anyway, but I will see what I can do here. Well, that was interesting. So I was trying to figure out how to get this apart. So what I did was I put a tap in all these holes, clean them all out. I figured I'd put this in here, bolt it down, and maybe that would compress my spring pressure a little bit to be able to release this, to get this snap collar out, wire out, and hopefully try to figure out how to get this apart, right? My idea. So I did all that, got it all in there, and that didn't work. So I go and take it back apart, took all the bolts out, and it wouldn't come out. Oh, what the heck? Well, it turned out these little sheet metal shim washer deals were wedged in. You know, the bore was too tight, so I couldn't pull it back out of there. So I just spent the last 15 minutes trying to get that back out. Finally just pried it out of there, but so yeah. I'm still not sure how I'm going to get that apart. So I'm pretty sure this half and this half see the hole in there for the oil. I think those are two separate pieces. I think that's threaded. Anyway, I got some supper.